very, very carefully, and a lot of your questions must have already been answered through that. My colleagues are going to try and explain it further so that your doubts are further cleared. For the purpose of questioning, we would encourage you to only use the chat box. Please do not use mic or video because then it would be very difficult for us to control the flow of the webinar. So I request once again all of you to please mute your mics and videos. I would introduce you to my colleagues now. We have with us today Mr. Mahesh Srivastav, the Regional Director for South Asia. We have Mr. Ben Smith. He's the Regional Director for Southeast Asia and Pacific. Both of them have been working hard to support their schools in this time and to clear their doubts. So they have come up with this presentation for all of us. Joining them is Mr. Satyajit Sarkar. He's the Senior Manager for East India, Nepal and Bangladesh. So I won't waste any further time, and then I'll hand over to Mahesh to take this forward. Thank you.
Nivedita, if Mahesh is not available at the moment, this is Ben speaking. I'd be happy to start.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes, you are.
Good morning.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, educators and school leaders. I hope you all are safe and with your loved ones in your home and have regular supplies of essentials. It's an unprecedented environment where 80% world population is under lockdown and all educational institutes have been closed to observe social distancing. We had to make difficult choices on the progression of our students, and we decided not to hold examination as we can't jeopardize life of our learner and teachers community. This was lesser bad choice available to us. We have been working very hard to develop the most reliable way of progression for our student. In this difficult and unusual scenario, we at Cambridge International, with the help of experienced and talented teachers and school leaders like you, need to work together for progression of our student. We shared our updates and hope that all of you have read and reread the same. We wanted to discuss these with you for better understanding, so we have organized this webinar. I would like to invite my colleague Ben, who is based out of Singapore and looks after Southeast Asia and Pacific region, to further decode the updates and make it simple to understand. Ben, thank you for joining to us. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you very much, Mahesh, and it's such a pleasure to be speaking with you from Singapore here. Welcome to friends and colleagues from India. I will speak for the next 20 minutes or more about the awarding of grades in the June 2020 session. I'll go over some of the ground that was already covered, dates, in the hope to making things very clear. I'd be very happy later to work with the colleagues to share the slides, as well as the recording for this webinar to anybody who has not, who wants to share it further with staff. And we will be taking questions through the chat function afterwards. Probably we may not be able to get through all of the questions. If that is so, then we also have a recording of all of the questions that were put, and we will analyze those in terms of those that have not yet been answered, so that we can get those answers to you. I will start with a brief recap of where we're at, and then I give you a summary of the process by which we arrive at alternative grades, go into further details on the 4 steps that are involved, and then finally answer a few questions that I anticipate you may have. And I hope that by then, perhaps I have answered more than 80% of the questions already. Let's hope. Let me start by what we already know. Brief recap, as Mahesh said, we had to take the unusual step of cancelling the exams for the May-June series because of concern for the health and safety of students and teachers during the global pandemic. Every student, however, that has been entered for this coming May-June series has the chance to go through an alternative assessment method, so that they can get on with their educational journeys as smoothly and as quickly as possible. And the approach fundamentally is one of collaboration between schools and Cambridge, so that together we can make decisions based on evidence about the grades that each candidate should get in each subject. That much, I think, is already known and understood. Let's get into the summary of how this alternative process works. There are 4 steps, and very briefly summarized, it's number 1, predicted grades, number 2, rank order, number 3, send and confirm, number 4, moderation and standardization. So step number 1, there we are relying on teachers to use their professional judgment to predict the grade that the student would have received in their subject if they had sat the exams as normal in May or June. That is what we call the predicted grade. Teacher judgment based on the best evidence to the teacher. Step number 2, we're then asking you to rank the students, put them in a rank order from highest to lowest attaining within a grade and within a subject. I'll explain more on how that works. In step 3, which is confirm and send, we're asking the head of the school or center that is making the entries to confirm the authenticity and professionalism of the process by which you have arrived at the judgments, and then send to us the predicted grades and rank order. In step 4, we, Cambridge, will then combine the data that we've received the schools with other information, the vast body of attainment data that we have available, and we will use statistical big data analysis methods to make any necessary adjustments to the predicted grades that we have received, so that the final grades may or may not be the same as the predicted grades. And on that basis, having standardized and moderated the grades, we will then determine the final grades and issue the certificates to students. That's the brief overview. I will explain in considerably more detail because I realize that this overview raises questions. Before I do so, a brief word on, is this process good enough? Well, we are in unique circumstances. There's a global pandemic going on. Many schools are closed. We can't hold exams as usual. So we have to look at what else we can do so that the current cohort of students is not systematically disadvantaged, but rather receive fair treatment. This alternative process that we have designed is, under the given circumstances, the most valid, fair, and effective approach. In that, I am confident. I think it can further give you confidence that we have developed this process not just by ourselves in isolation, but we have closely coordinated with other international awarding bodies, with governments, with universities worldwide, particularly in the destination countries for our students, and also with Ofqual as the UK exam regulator. Ofqual, as you may have read in the media, has developed a process, an alternative grading process, given that the UK-based GCSE and A-level exams are also cancelled. So for the schools in England, there will be a process for an alternative grading approach that is substantially very similar to the process that we're proposing. And the same is true for other international awarding bodies that follow processes that are substantially very similar to the process that we are following. What differences there are determined by some differences in approach to curriculum and assessment, and of course to context of schools across these different awarding organizations. Further, the certificates that we award for this June 2020 series and the grades, although they will have been arrived at different alternative process, the certificates will look the same as in any other series, and the grades will have the same value as in any other series. In all of this, the universities, of course, are crucial with regards to those students who are at the end of their school journey and would be applying to university. We've been in very close contact and communication with the universities throughout so that they understand our process, and we continue to explain it further as we develop further details. What we already know is that the universities are committed to treating this current cohort of students with flexibility and fairness. I think these are the two key words. Flexibility means the universities are not only aware of the circumstances under which this current cohort are completing their educational journey at school and coming to them, but they're determined to treat them, to take these circumstances into account and adapt their admissions procedures accordingly. Fairness means that they will adapt their admissions procedures flexibly with the explicit purpose to avoid any disadvantage to the current cohort. Based on that, we're very confident that the universities will treat these certificates that grade will be issuing under the alternative process in the same way as they would any other Cambridge certificate arrived at under the usual methodology. We'll continue, of course, to share the same kinds of detail that I'm sharing with you now, also with the universities. And on that basis, I expect in the next few days and weeks, this general commitment to crystallize into very specific commitments around the admissions process. Now, as to those details, in step one, how do we arrive at predicted grades? Or rather, how do you and your teachers arrive at that? What is the predicted grade, first of all? It is a grade that, in the professional opinion of the teacher, the candidate would have achieved if he had sat the exam in May, June the normal way. That means the subject teachers should determine that predicted grade for each of their students that are entered in the syllabus based on the best available evidence of the candidate's performance. Best available is important. We realize that schools are in very different situations. It's unusual. And so we're not looking at a very strictly determined set of evidence and only that. We're asking you to look at the best evidence that is available to you under the given circumstances, whether that is coursework, classwork, assignments, marked homework,
mock exams, or any other evidence that you may have that could reasonably inform your professional judgment of the grade that the candidate would have achieved if they had sat the exam under normal circumstances. The different sources of evidence that you have, you will of course need to weigh up as to how relevant it is and what weighting you want to give to that. And again, that is your judgment, professional judgment, which in these circumstances is crucially important to make so that your judgment will be made as objectively and accurately as you possibly can. Predicted grades are not the same as forecast grades. It could be the same, but it doesn't have to be. And the predicted grades, if you already submitted forecast grades, the predicted grades have to be submitted separately. It can, but doesn't have to be the same as the forecast grades. In step two, we're asking you to determine a rank order. Now let's break that down into further detail a bit. We're looking at the group of candidates that have been entered for a given syllabus. Let us say IGCSE Physics. And within that, those candidates for whom you've predicted the same grade. Let's say a grade B in IGCSE Physics. And let's assume, for argument's sake, that that is 10 candidates that you predict get a B in IGCSE Physics. Then we're asking you to rank these 10 students from top highest attaining number 1 to lowest attaining number 10. So that the number 1 would be the high B in IGCSE Physics, almost an A, and number 10 would be a low B in IGCSE Physics, almost a C. You have to do this separately for every grade predicted and for in every syllabus. And there also needs to be only one rank order for each grade in the syllabus, and that order must not contain any ties. In other words, for this process to work, you cannot say we have 2 or 3 candidates that we all place at number 3 within the B band for IGCSE Physics. No, you have to decide among these which one, 1, 2, 3. When it comes to step 4, it becomes obvious why that is necessary. I want to stress that it is necessary. So it must be complete rank order. You cannot leave anybody out, and you cannot tie anybody. Under 3, which is submit. The head of center, the head of that school or center that makes the entries, has to confirm to us 2 things. And this is what previously we called the authentication. We're asking you to confirm something in process and in substance. In process, we're asking you to confirm that the predicted grades and the rank orders that you submit have been properly decided, that you follow the proper process. And we're also asking you to confirm that they reflect a fair professional judgment of the candidates. That's in substance. So what does that really mean? What you as a school leader, if you're the head of the school that makes the entries, we're asking you to confirm 3 things. One is that the process of making these judgments has been carried out professionally. Number 2, that it has been carried out under your personal oversight. And number 3, that it has been carried out by people whose judgment you trust. If you can confirm these 3 things, that is what we're asking you to authenticate. It does not mean, importantly, we're not asking school leaders to scrutinize every single grade given and to be able to agree or disagree with any given grade on that detail level. We're asking you to vouch for the propriety of the entire process and for the fairness of the judgment that's been arrived at. Then you need to submit those data by a deadline that will be earlier than the 29th of May. It could be a little bit later, and we'll confirm that very soon, but it will definitely be no earlier than the 29th of May. And from that day on, you will have a window of at least 2 weeks in which to submit the data. So that means you have approximately the next 2 months to carry out this exercise. Then in step 4, once you have given us the predicted grades and the rank orders, we will do a standardization that is based on statistical methods and on the vast range of attainment data that we have. And that looks at those data in 2 dimensions. The time dimension at the historical performance of candidates in your school, if that data is available, and of course, if there is a relatively consistent cohort in your school. So if that is the case, we'll look at the overall rate distribution, and that will inform our judgment. But we'll also look in the vertical dimension, so to speak, at the global attainment data that we have. And especially for schools where we do not have a long historical record of attainment, we will need to be looking at comparisons with statistically similar schools and other statistically relevant reference points in order to arrive at that judgment. Now, the point of that standardization exercise is to look at the overall distribution of the predicted grades. In other words, we will not change the rank order that you have given us. We will standardize the overall grade distribution of a center in line with what, on the basis of our statistical analysis, we would expect that grade distribution to be. In other words, we will not change the rank order, but if overall the candidates, the grade distribution that the center submits is higher than what we would expect based on statistical analysis, we will adjust downwards. And if the overall grade distribution and profile is lower in a given center than what our statistical analysis would suggest, we will adjust upwards. So the point is to align judgments across centers, not between candidates in a given school. That is entirely up to your professional judgment. It also means that where a school submits unrealistically high grades, they will not gain an advantage because we would adjust downwards if that were the case. It also means, importantly, and I'll come back to that, that the grades that we award to candidates may be the same as the predicted grades, but may also not be the same. I said the rank order is important. You can see that in this exercise, if there's an upward or downward adjustment, the candidates that are at the extreme ends of the rank order are more likely to be affected by that adjustment and then get a different grades than the ones that are in the middle. That was the further detail on the 4 steps, and now I will address a few questions that I imagine are in people's minds. On steps 1 and 2, and with regards to evidence. The keyword is best available evidence. Best available evidence to base your professional teacher judgment on. That can include classwork, coursework, assignments, mock exams, or if you have conducted any baseline tests such as Chem, that would be very strong evidence also. Can it include work that has been completed remotely as schools have been closed? The answer is yes, but only if you can be confident that it is the candidate's own and unaided work. You don't need to submit cast grades, and if you've already done so, you do not need to amend them. You also do not need to submit coursework or any other for that matter. In some cases, there may be evidence that relates only to a specific component of the syllabus. In that case, please consult the syllabus document because different components in the syllabus will have different weighting, and that should guide you in making the overall judgment. If you have candidates that are on staged route to A-level, in other words, those that have already done their AS-level exam in the normal way previously, and in June series would have sat the A-levels, then the previous AS-level performance is considered a very strong indicator of future A-level performance. The same goes for resets. In other words, if a student has already sat, let's say, an IGCSE exam previously, and this June series would have been a reset for them, then the performance in the previous one is actually a good indicator of what they would receive this time. About half of the candidates typically receive the same grade, very few improve more than one grade in a reset. A few more do's and don'ts in terms of predicted grade. It's helpful to look at the evidence of candidate performance at different grades in various forms of guidance that is already available from Cambridge. Points to example candidate responses, to coursework training handbooks, grade thresholds in past papers, the mark schemes, as well as the grade descriptions that are available for some syllabuses, but not for all. You want to make sure that the predicted grades are consistent for the subject, and that will in all likelihood involve some form of teacher conferencing around the predicted grades and the rank orders. Importantly, if you set target grades previously during the course, don't use those. They're typically aspirational, which would mean somewhat on the high side. Also, don't base your prediction on candidates having a good day in an exam, or conversely having a bad day in an exam. Go for the middle ground. On evidence, a few more points. What we're asking you to send are the predicted grades and the rank orders. We're not asking you to submit the evidence on which you base your judgment. What we are asking you to do is to retain the evidence that you used to inform your judgment. Don't send it to us unless specifically requested. So if we requested, then it would be for sampling purposes, statistical sampling as part of the moderation of the checks and balances. And we would tell you for which candidates we need the underlying evidence that informed your judgment. So what you need to retain as evidence is the evidence, and this is important, that was available to you at the time of making the judgment. It does not necessarily mean the actual physical, let's say, papers, marked papers of the mock exam or the actual coursework. It means, for example, if actual student work or is no longer available to you, or you had a mock exam, but the marked and grade papers were actually sent back to the students and they lost them, or you can't get to them. That is not a problem as long as you have a record. The assessment that you made at the time, the marks and the grades that you recorded, then that record of your assessment of the mock exam or the coursework or the class assignment, whatever it may be, that is the evidence that we're asking you to retain. Do not please set new work or mock exams to gather additional evidence unless it's absolutely necessary to do so. And why? We could see in the next 2 months, and this is in your hands, a mad race to run students through all kinds of different additional assessments, etc., etc. which means they don't get taught properly because they have to set, and importantly, it will not gain you any advantage. Why? Because of the standardization process. Anything that is unrealistically high will adjust downwards. So if you look at the evidence that is available to you and you say, yeah, that's reasonably sufficient to make an informed professional judgment as to the grade they would have received, fine, leave it at that. Only if for one syllabus or a component of the syllabus you have absolutely no evidence and you say, I really don't know this student, would it be an A, would it be a C, I have no idea. In that case, it may be necessary to gather additional evidence so that the student can get a grade and a certificate. A brief word on private candidates. Happy to take further questions on that, but just briefly, we'll treat private candidates in the same way as school candidates. They will get a grade and a certificate based on evidence, provided that we can get sufficient and reliable evidence. And the head of the center making the entries for the private candidates has to vouch for the authenticity of the evidence in the same way as for any other case. In other words, has to vouchsafe that it was a professional process supervised by him or her personally and based on the judgment of people whom he can trust. If that can be authenticated and there's sufficient evidence available to you to make a professional judgment, then submit that and the candidates will get a grade and a certificate. If you cannot vouchsafe for any of this, either the sufficiency of evidence or the authenticity of the process, then the private candidate will not be able to get a grade and a certificate in this way, and then the option for them would only be to take an exam in the November 2020 series. About fees, I say we understand that the current pandemic has, in some cases, a considerable financial impact on schools, parents, and students, and we're highly sympathetic to that. We're doing some urgent work on the fees, which if we had this exam tomorrow, I would be able to confirm already. The confirmation will go out later tonight, or possibly with the time difference reach us tomorrow morning. So I'll have to ask for just a few more hours of patience on the confirmation of fees. What I can confirm already is the following. If there's insufficient evidence, in other words, you find, having gone through the process, that you cannot give a predicted grade or place in the rank order, then that candidate would not get a grade or certificate from Cambridge, and of course, we would refund in that case the entry fee. Also, for late entries until 17th of April or withdrawals up to the 1st of May, there will be no charge, of course, given the current circumstances. Speaking about entries and withdrawals, you can make or withdraw any entries until the 17th of April, and you can do so via Cambridge International Direct. In some cases, you can make later withdrawals until the 1st of May, and that would concern withdrawals for a whole cohort of candidates for a given syllabus, or a small number of candidates about whom you cannot find any evidence. And in that case, please use our customer services email info@cambridgeinternational.org. No fees apply under those circumstances. Just a few more things before I conclude. Some of you may already have received question papers. If so, please do not open them. Hold on to them. We'll give further guidance shortly. The second one important, please do not share the predicted rank order with students, parents, or anyone else. Why? You will get into hot water. You will get into trouble because parents and students will exert pressure in all likelihood for you to predict grades that may not be your judgment, really. So strong advice, do not enter into those kinds of conversations. Submit the predicted grades and the rank order to Cambridge. Wait what the final judgment is on the final grades, then issue the final grades to the students. Also, of course, to manage expectations, because the final grade can be different from the predicted grade. Appeals, of course, will be possible, particularly where there's reason to believe that we made an error in our standardization process. Anybody who's disappointed with the grade they receive in this way has an option to sit the exam in November 2020 or June 2021 indeed. We're acutely aware that in the November series, traditionally not as many subjects are available as in the June series, and we're doing very urgent work to address that and expand the range. Unfortunately, I'm not yet in a position to confirm exactly what subjects are available, but colleagues are very much aware of the urgency, and I expect an update either later this week or early next week at the latest. The release of the results, the date, which is traditionally in August 2020, is not affected by this different process. It will go ahead as planned. So I'll conclude, stepping back from all the detail. The big picture is the exams are cancelled, but normal grades and certificates are available for all the students who have been entered. Under these exceptional circumstances, these grades and certificates are based on an alternative grading process based on best available evidence. And that means it combines the professional judgment of teachers, of your teachers, which is based on the best evidence that is available to them at that time, with a standardization process, a moderation process carried out by Cambridge based on the statistical analysis of the big data that we hold on student attainment worldwide. So that means it's really working together to ensure that in spite of the global pandemic, this current cohort of students can progress in their educational journey, not only safely, but also smoothly and quickly. I'm very grateful for you to taking the time to be here with us to understand the process so that we can do this together. Thank you very much. I'll now be open for questions.
Thank you, Ben. Nivedita, we have got a lot of questions we can raise one by one.
Yes, so Ben, the most recurring question seems to be whether for the subjects that children do coursework, are they still required to submit the coursework or not? So would you like to address that?
Yes, with regards to questions where normally we would ask for coursework as part of the assessment, you no longer need to submit that coursework. That is no longer necessary. What you can do instead, of course, where you have coursework, you can look at the guidance that is available on the standards required, and you can use that coursework as part of the body of evidence that you base your judgment on in order to make predicted grades. And that applies equally to any kind of coursework, whether that is in the humanities and arts, or whether we're looking at also orals in the languages, or indeed any practicals in the sciences. It applies equally to all these types of non-exam based evidence.
Thanks, Ben. So I'll just summarize that once again. Right now, you are not required to submit any kind of coursework for any subject. However,
Correct.
You can retain that as part of the evidence on which you would base your predicted grades. So that was, I hope
yes.
that's clear now.
Can I just add,
Yes,
when we're talking about retaining evidence, I know that a number of school leaders or teachers are worried that perhaps the actual coursework is no longer available to them. For example, you returned it to the students and they, you can't collect it back. That is not the problem. So the evidence that we're asking you to retain is not the physical actual coursework. It is the record of the assessments that you've made of that coursework. And that is what you need to retain.
Thanks, Ben. So the next question is about those students who have just made for the AS level students for whom the entries have been made. So how would we arrive at their grades?
For the AS level students that are entered for this June series, the process is no different for any of the other students. You need to look at best available evidence to inform your judgment. What you may want to consider, of course, is whether if the students sit, there's two different possibilities. Some students sit the AS level exams and then stop and apply to universities with the AS levels. In that case, in all likelihood, they would want you to proceed with the current process so that they have a grade and certificate and can apply to university. In many other cases, the AS level is a stepping stone on the way to the staged route to A levels. In that case, it's a consideration, and it's really an option up to you. But you can consider whether you wish to withdraw the AS level students on this occasion, and then you could either ask them to sit there in November, or of course not at all, and instead go straight to the full A-level exams in the next June 2021 series. So that, which would mean that for this year, under these circumstances, of course you have the option to suspend your non-staged approach, AS and then A-level, and instead go directly to level. It's an option. The judgment is up to you.
Thanks, Ben. The next question is about many people are coming up with this, that either they have very few candidates for a syllabus. So how do they do the rank order? And the opposite is that if we have a big number in a syllabus within the same grade, so how do we do the rank order?
Yes. In the case of a school that has very few candidates in a given syllabus, you could, at the extreme end, arrive in a situation where you have only one candidate that you predict a certain grade. Let's say, stick with my example, IGCSE Physics, you have only one candidate you predict a B. Then your task of coming up with a rank order is very simple. It's 1. That's it. Then it's a rank order of 1. That's not a problem. The opposite end, where a school has many students, and that's particularly in some of the very popular subjects, you may end up with considerably more than perhaps 10 students for a given grade in a given subject. So let's say you have 20 or even 30 students or more for a given grade. Then in all likelihood, they might also have been taught by different teachers. And that means as a school leader, you will need to organize teacher conferences around the rank order, where at least that would be our recommendation for an appropriate process, whereby you get the teachers together and everyone would come with their suggested rank order, and then you go through that within each grade. You look at, for example, you could start with the top performing students within that grade, within that band, and then someone, for example, the head of department suggests a possible number 1, and then the other teachers could look at the other candidates that have all agreed to be within that band, for example, grade B in IGCSE Physics, and then see whether there's any student that they say should reasonably be ranked higher than the one who's been proposed as 1. And once there's agreement on 1, then you go to the next one and say, okay, we propose student A, and is there anybody who would suggest that another student should be in rank 2, etc., etc. And by the end of that process, you will have arrived at a consensus around the rank order, which is then fairly consistent across different teachers. I do realize that for larger schools, that does present a certain challenge of organization.
Yes, it does. But having said that, let's just reinforce that irrespective of the number of students, you will have to come up with a rank order. And within the same grade, no 2 students should have the same rank order. I understand that at times it's very difficult to segregate between the levels, and we feel that 2 or 3 students at the same level. But I'm sure as teachers, you would find your judgment helping you in deciding who is a shade better than the other. So please be mindful that the rank order has to be different for every student within a grade. Thanks, Ben. The next question is
also
about...
Perhaps to just ease people's minds around this, first of all, the clarity is, be in no doubt, no rank order, no grade, no certificate. So you have to submit the rank order in order for students to get the grade or the certificate. But within that, understand that the rank order itself will only in marginal cases actually affect the grade that the student will get. It is to remove ambiguity in marginal cases where we make upwards or downwards adjustments. So for the large large majority of students, where they're placed in the rank order will not make a difference to the grade that they finally get. And of course, it will also never be recorded on a certificate or any other official record. It is merely for the purposes of reducing or actually eliminating ambiguity as to what grade anybody should get at the margins in cases where we need to make an adjustment. I hope that helps a little bit in terms of understanding the consequences of making ranking decisions.
Right. The next question is about statistical data. So people want to know that when you said statistical analysis, what data are we going to use? And if we are going to use historical data of a school, how far are we going to go back? And whether it would be subject-wise or overall? And what about the schools who are entering for the first time? I'm sorry,
yes.
3 questions together for you, Ben.
Yes, let's start with the case of schools where historical data is available on a relatively consistent cohort for years. That is the best case scenario. And we would not go back for a long time. In all likelihood, look at something like the last 3 years or so. And within that, look at the grade distribution. And we'd also make sure that if outliers, then if in doubt, we interpret that past in favor of the school rather than against it. So where there are decisions to be made, we will err on a favor for the schools where we have long data available historically. So that will inform the grade distribution per subject, not just the school entirely, but for the subject or syllabus rather, for the entire school, upwards or downwards adjustments within, let's say, the biology IGCSE for that school. In cases where historical data is not available or only a very limited set, we will have to supplement that with the global attainment figures, and there we'd be looking at statistically similar schools.
Hi, Ben. If I may come in, there was a specific question with regard to how long the evidence needs to be retained by the schools.
Thank you, sir. As I had that question previously, and I have not seen a clear guidance on that point yet. What I assume, but this is me speculating, it would obviously have to be at least the point of release results, and beyond that, during the process that where normally there would be inquiries about results and so on. But unfortunately, I cannot give you a definite answer on that point yet. I've already noted it from a previous session as something that I need to find out.
Okay, one of the other follow-up question was that how do the schools evaluate grades or predict grades in terms of if there are learning disabilities with students and they're being allotted extra time? Would they be graded or predicted at the same as the normal candidate?
That's a very good question. In the case of students with some barriers to learning, if this is a student where in the exam they would have had adjustments to the exam conditions that we call access arrangements, as the technical term that we use, then we ask you to base your judgment on the question, what grade would that candidate have achieved in the exams if the access arrangements had also been made? So, for example, if the access arrangement would have been that the student would have allotted extra time, then take that into account. So in other words, the same kind of adjustment that the student would have received through access arrangements in the exams, that please take into account when you predict the grades. So it's the same underlying principle. What grade would that student have achieved if they had sat the exams in the normal way? In that case, with access arrangements.
Thank you for answering that, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Right. So the next question is for Mahesh and Satyajit probably. So will the Indian universities accept the grade that is given here, and whether the percentage uniform marks would be given along with the grades or not?
Sure. Zach, would you like to answer or shall I take it?
You can take it. Or
Sure. So I would like to take. And given the unprecedented scenario at this moment, universities are eager to listen what type of a grades that we are going to give, and they are convinced with our methodology. We will keep our schools updated on that. As far as the PUM is concerned, we are not yet sure how we will do it and whether we will be able to do it. Stay tuned. We will come back to you on this.
And just to add to that, we did have an update from our recognitions manager who informed us that the AIU has a mechanism wherein a grade can be converted into marks. It is available on their website and it is accepted by the universities. You are welcome to contact the managers with your individual queries about this later. One more question is about how would schools be submitting the rank orders and grades. Ben, so if you would like to address that?
Yes, as to the procedure for submitting the rank order and the grades, we will give further, more detailed guidance on the procedure a little bit later. We're currently still in the process of adapting our IT systems to this different submission, which is different than in usual years. So, and that will determine how exactly it will work. But of course, you have the next 2 months or more to prepare and then make the submission. So we'll give exact guidance on the procedure in very good time. It's just that at the moment I don't have the specifics of that yet until we have completed the adaptation of our IT systems to this different process.
Thanks. And I think there is another question that is coming again and again about the private candidates. So whether a school head can authenticate the judgment given by a private tutor, or if they have insufficient evidence, how do they give a predicted grade or rank order for private students? So would you like to just repeat what you said earlier?
Yes, it's an important and it's a difficult question. And if you're the head of a school that also accepts private candidates, it's a challenge that you have there and a decision that you will have to make and that only you can make. I can give you some guidance as to the considerations that you have to go through. And I hope that, of course, because as the head of the center that makes the entries for your own school candidates as well as for private candidates, you are who will have to sign off on the propriety and authenticity of the process and the judgments. And so you will have to think carefully with regards to private candidates whether you are in a position to do so. Of course, we hope that all private candidates, or as many as possible, can get a grade in the certificate, but not in all cases will it be possible. And here's what you have to think about for the private candidates that you normally accept and that are entered through your school. You have to sign off on exactly the same thing with regards to the private candidates as with regards to the school candidates. That means you have to consider, first of all, who is making the judgment on the grade that private candidate would have received. And is that person, as such, someone whose judgment in this context you can trust? So in an extreme case where someone is homeschooled and the only judgment you have to rely on is the parents, that would almost by definition not be reliable. Where it is the tutor, that is a more difficult question. What relationship do you have with that tutor? Do you know them at all? Are they professional enough that you can trust their judgment? Can you integrate them into the decision-making process at your school? Because after all, the rank order that you have within a given grade may be a mixture of your own school candidates and the private candidates, and it needs to be one rank order. In this case, between your own school candidates and the candidates. So that means anybody whose judgment you will rely on with regards to the private candidate performance needs to be someone who you can integrate into the process sufficiently that it is consistent and that you can come up with one agreed rank order between them. And then in addition, of course, let's assume that the person who is making the judgment on the predicted grades for the private candidates at your center is someone who you know sufficiently well, and you say, yes, this is someone whose judgment I can trust. And I can also integrate them into the process, that it's a professional process, it's consistent, I supervised it myself. 2 out of 3 are good. But then does that person, even though I trust them, does that person have enough evidence available to make that judgment? What evidence do they have? In some cases, even though it may be someone who in principle they say, yeah, I could trust him or her, do you know what evidence that judgment is based on? If you don't even know what evidence that judgment is based on, and they're not telling you, then personally I would be very hesitant to sign off. Because how can you then say it's a proper process? But if you know, yes, that person looked at such evidence and I can trust them and they're part of the process that I supervised, then it's a yes. Then you can sign off on that, and then we're in the fortunate position that we're able to give the private candidates a grade and a certificate. That, I realize very much in saying this, it does not take away from the fact that you will have to make that decision. I cannot, of course, make that decision for you. I hope that I can give you some guidance as to the, and I admit, difficult considerations that you will have to make as to whether or not you're in a position to sign off on what you would need to sign off to give those students a grade. I hope that you can, but if you cannot, then that is also a decision that you will have to make.
Thank you, Ben.
Right. I think with that, we come to the end of this webinar. We have already extended 10 minutes. I can see some very subject-specific questions in the chat box. I would request the school heads and teachers to please post them to info. I think subject-related queries you will get the best and specific answer from there. And for the rest of the questions, please write to your regional managers and we'll try to come back to you with the answers as soon as possible. Ben, thank you so much for your time, and Mahesh and Satyajit, thank you so much.
And whatever the
wish you all the best. Yes, Mahesh.
Whatever the question you are not able to take it at this forum, we will prepare a FAQ and we'll share to you all guys.
Right.
Good. I thank you all for your time, for being here. This is the current cohort of students are going through their education under very challenging and difficult circumstances with the global pandemic. Let's do what we can to at least give them the grade and certificate that they deserve so that they can get on with their educational journey as quickly and smoothly as possible. And for that, we rely on you to work together with us to get that done. In that sense, I'm really grateful that you're here, that you're engaging with us with questions to understand the process so that we can get the grades to the students that they deserve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Please feel free to leave the session now. I'm going to close.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this webinar session today. Thank you.